Senators, as you are aware, an order of reference was adopted in the Senate on November 26, 2025, authorizing this committee to examine and report on the subject matter of those elements contained in Divisions 4, 9 to 17, 22, 23, 37, 43, and 45 of Part 5 of Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on November 4, 2025. As the bill is currently at second reading in the House of Commons, the Senate has undertaken what is known as a pre-study. So we begin today this study by welcoming officials from 4 departments and agencies of the federal government which deal with the divisions at study, and we thank you for your patience. The Department of Finances Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, and the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, also known as FINTRAC. So I wish to welcome all of our witnesses to our committee and thank you for accepting the invitation to appear before us. If agreed by all senators, I would suggest that we begin our work starting with Division 4 and work our way up to Division 45. When a division is called, I will announce it and will ask that the relevant witnesses please come forward to the table and place their name cards in front of them. Dear witnesses, I will ask that you please clearly state your name into the microphone so that it can be added to the record. If witnesses wish to speak briefly on the division, I would ask that you indicate that to me. Otherwise, I will open the floor to senators to ask you questions.
4, amendment to the Canada Infrastructure Act. So I invite the official who will be involved in that Division 4 to go. And in fact, if you can introduce yourself, mention to me if you have any opening remarks or not. And after that, we'll go with the Q&A. So you have the floors. So welcome, Madam. So I will ask you to introduce yourself with your colleague, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine McCauley, and I am the Director General of Alternative Finance at Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada. I am pleased to appear before the committee today to speak to Division 4 of Part 5, page 298 of Bill C-15, which proposes to increase the Canada Infrastructure Bank's maximum statutory capital, which can be found in Section 23 of the CIB Act, from $35 billion to $45 billion. Since its creation in 2017, the CIB has committed almost $18 billion through loans and repayable investments across 106 projects, representing a total capital value of roughly $54 billion, as well as approximately, and for every dollar the CIB invests, it leverages roughly $1.4 in private and institutional investment, as well as approximately equal contributions from other orders of government and public partners. Of these projects, 84% or 89 are currently under construction, and 8 are complete and operational. As repayments are received, the CIB reinvests both principal and interest into new projects, maintaining a revolving approach to investment. The CIB is currently committing capital at a rate of approximately $3.5 billion per year. As of September 2025, in its second quarter financial results, the bank had reached financial close on $2.2 billion in new investments this year. Increasing the CIB's total statutory capital to $45 billion would allow it to scale up annual investments to between $4 and $5 billion per year, surpassing the initial capital appropriation of $35 billion in early 2029 as expected. The increase also provides the financial flexibility needed to continue advancing projects, including those with longer lead times, as well as to support Budget 2025 commitments, such as making investments in projects referred through the Major Projects Office. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague, Marie-Joie Brady, and myself would be pleased to answer the committee's questions.
Thank you. So, colleagues, I realize that it's not maybe all of you want to ask questions for each division. So what I propose is just let me know. I will go on that round like that. For the other division, I will do the opposite. This will be what I propose to do. So I will start with on my left. So by Mr. Friedendler.
I'm just doing some simple arithmetic here. They've got 18 billion out. They currently have capitalization of 35, which leaves them with 17. Now you want to put it to 45, which leaves them with 27. And you tell me that they're hoping to accelerate to 4 to 5 billion a year. That's over 5 years today that we're looking to increase. I don't understand why we need to be doing this now.
Thank you for the question. You're quite right. The CIB has roughly $18 billion in investments made to date. It also has a very healthy pipeline of projects where it has advanced discussions on those projects and has projections that sees it investing all of its capital prior to or in 2029. Increasing the CIB's statutory capital limit to $45 billion now allows it to advance in discussions that have longer lead times and avoid choosing shorter-term projects over longer-term projects. It allows a signal to the marketplace that it can engage in those discussions, as well as engage in projects of national interest that might be referred from the Major Projects Office.
If I might supplement,
3 minutes each.
So just a brief supplement. So not only does my simple arithmetic lead me to believe that there's 27 million of available, but I haven't accounted for the revolving opportunities as well. So I just making the comment that this is a huge increase along with the revolving capital with, I don't know, that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you. So any question, Senator Cinco?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here to two of our witnesses. So increase in the CIB's capital would speed up development. How do you define a high-impact infrastructure project for affordable housing? And what are the guarantees that these funds will really be directed at the housing crisis rather than projects that are already capitalized? Good day. Thank you for your question, Marie-Joie Brady. I am the Director of Policy Partnerships and Engagement. That is a good question that you're asking. At the bank, we define a project of impact by looking at infrastructure that facilitates housing. So the bank invests in drinking water, wastewater infrastructure. These are things that facilitate housing. So it does not invest in houses or rental housing, for example. So the way that we can ensure that the bank will continue to facilitate all of this is through the bank's initiative on housing infrastructure, which is directed at these high-scale, large-scale projects. And this allows the banks to invest more in that type of project.
Lefredo, if you have any questions,
yes.
3 minutes.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Président, and thank you for being
Chair.
here. So the Infrastructure Bank has spent 50% of its statutory envelope thus far. You tell me the pipeline is very healthy at this point. So why is it healthy at this point? And the second question, why is public investment needed to that extent? I mean, I've always said wealth is created by the entrepreneurs. And if it is a project for the public good, why would we need public funding and not private investment?
Thank you very much for the question. Maybe I'll answer the first part of your question, which is that why is it interpreting, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why is it healthy now and perhaps not before? I would say that the bank has scaled up its investments significantly since about 2022, and where we have seen it achieve roughly $3.5 billion in annual disbursements following an initial ramp-up period. As a result of those considerable efforts to engage with the various proponents of infrastructure projects across Canada over that time, those projects which are complex in nature and take time to move forward are now coming to fruition and being readied for investments. And maybe I'll answer the second part of your question, which is why the need for public dollars to attract private capital. Infrastructure is a great investment for the private sector. However, there are some types of risks that the private sector is reticent to take on in terms of making its investment. The CIB is able to bridge those gaps and crowd in private capital so that less public dollars are required for a project to proceed. And they do this in repayable loans or other investments, which represents less cost to the taxpayer in terms of delivering that infrastructure.
Thank you. Merci.
So moving, I don't know if Senator Ringuette, yeah, you have some question.
Quick question. Exactly that, like you mentioned in your overview that these loans or investment, I should say, are repayable over time. But we're not only talking about loans here. I believe we're always also talking about, actions, les actions des corporations, etc. So how is the portfolio divided in regards to repayable loan and the scale of time to repay these loans and the les actions, the shares, okay, that you purchase, which only would hopefully over time pay dividend. So these are two different investment structure. So when can we have an overview of that portfolio?
Thank you for the question. You're quite right. The CIB has a broad suite of tools that it is able to use to make investments in infrastructure, which includes both loans as well as equity positions. To date, the CIB has predominantly used loans as its primary tool. What it has been able to find is that through the various constructs of the loans that it issues, it is able to account for the vast majority of risks that are seen by proponents and able to kind of solve the problem at hand and the gap to be filled. Which means that it is now receiving principal and interest on those investments, which are used to both make new investments on a revolving basis, as well as to pay for the operations of the CIB on a self-sustaining basis.
So in essence, the additional $10 billion that you're seeking through this budget bill will be in addition to what cash flow you still have and the returns that from your investment. So we're looking at how many billions?
In terms of capital that was repaid last year, the CIB received roughly $69 million in interest. That also included, there was also some capital repaid. However, those numbers don't facilitate large-scale new investments. And so over time, it is expected that the amounts received in both capital and interest will be adequate to fund more investments, and so the investment horizon will be larger. But for the near term, a capital increase is required so as to enable the pace of investment that the CIB currently has and that is expected of the CIB in terms of contributing to the most recent budget commitments in terms of major projects and alignment with new programming that is underway.
Thank you, Senator. Quickly.
As a shareholder, every shareholder, which is every Canadian taxpayer, should have a profile of the portfolio. That's my comment. And that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we'll have an opportunity to provide some observation in our pre-study. So it's so Senator again. So going to Senator Youssef. No question. Senator McBee.
Thank you. 2 questions. How will the increased funding ensure balanced regional development, including rural and northern communities? And then what accountability mechanisms are going to track the outcome of these major public investments? You were saying so far 8 or 9 of them are done. So how are we going to know, to the shareholder question, how are we going to know the effectiveness of this investment in the future?
Thank you for the question. In terms of regional distribution, the CIB is able to indicate that they have projects in every province and region of the country right now. And that represents an achievement because the CIB has always been an optional tool available to provinces and municipalities. And so, in some cases, some public entities are less willing to work with the CIB because of preferring traditional modes of infrastructure financing. On to the second part of your question, if I may, in terms of what are the accountability mechanisms. Per the CIB's legislation, for every investment that it makes, there has to be 3 things present: that there is revenue associated with the project, that there is private capital that is attracted, and that the project is in the public interest. So for the CIB to be able to deploy capital into a project, it's got to satisfy those 3 tests. And the government has established priority sectors for the CIB to operate in. Those are clean power, green infrastructure, public transit, broadband, and trade and transportation. Thank you. And among those, it has established public outcome benefits associated with each of those sectors. In a number of cases, that represents greenhouse gas reduction. Other cases, it reflects connections, either through connectivity to broadband services or for people, in the case of public transportation. And then when it comes to trade and transportation, it represents GDP growth in terms of economic activity. And the CIB looks at each investment to be able to determine how much capital it was willing to deploy based on the public outcomes associated with that project. Over time, it looks at those projects and tracks those based on the performance results that it brings forward in regular reporting that it does through both its corporate plan on an annual basis and its annual report.
And so you're saying there's, like, I hear you saying there's the 3 factors going in, and then when a project's done, are you tracking that is that what actually happened? Like, is there an accountability for, what you wanted and what was projected at the beginning versus successful completion? Were all 3 partners? Was the
in terms of the so right now there's 8 projects in operations, and the CIB provides updates on those projects through its annual reporting. Yeah.
So thank you, Senator. Moving to Senator Deakin.
Division 9. I'll wait till Division 9.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Senator Walden.
Thank you. Just a question. It comes back to Senator Friedhandler. So you didn't spend the money, so you got more money. And what was the issue? Why could you not spend your money, and why did you need more?
Thank you for the question. To date, the CIB has spent $18 billion in investments, and it is in the stages of negotiating commitments for the remainder of that capital. in order to continue to advance projects across the priority sectors established by the government, as well as to continue to engage with proponents around new projects, it needs to be able to have a horizon of capital certainty to be able to do so. And based on what it has done to date and it knows is in its current pipeline, it foresees a capital scarcity.
Let me ask it this way. Where did the demand for more money to spend / invest come from? Was this client-driven, that you saw some kind of increased demand out in the private sector, or did government decide you should have an increase because they were going to put the MPO in place and they wanted another source?
Understanding that the CIB is expected to work with the Major Projects Office to invest in projects of national significance, as well as a number of new programming efforts that were announced in the budget, including the Trade Diversification Corridors Fund, the Arctic Infrastructure Fund, the First and Last Mile Fund, as well as the Build Community Strong Fund. It is anticipated that the demand for CIB financing will continue to grow associated with those initiatives, and so the CIB requires additional capital.
The top down, not the bottom up. This was government saying more funding is needed, rather than the private sector letting you know that they needed you.
It was based on an analysis of the pipeline of projects that were expected to come forward.
Okay, thank you.
So regarding why asking more money if you don't have, so no problem. I take no offense. So moving to Senator Marshall.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have several questions. Regarding the additional $10 billion that you're looking for, I would have expected to see it in the corporate plan. But I see now that your financial statements as of the 31st of March, 2025, were actually qualified because the bank had not submitted its corporate plan for 25-26 to 29-30, which is required under your legislation. So can you explain that, especially since there's a request there for an additional $10 billion?
The CIB, the current proposed changes that will be reflected in the CIB's upcoming corporate plans, specifically likely for the 26-27 corporate plan, given the timing of the proposed legislation.
25-26 corporate plan, because the corporation is looking for the $10 billion now. I would think that it would be reflected in the plan that's missing, but what you're saying is that government wants the $10 billion approved, and they'll submit the required, well, they won't even submit the required plan. They'll skip over this required plan and submit one for the following year. That's very strange.
Well, under the legislation, it's required to submit a corporate plan every single year. And the 25-26 corporate plan is currently in the process of moving through approvals and is expected to be ready very shortly. In terms of your question around why it was not included, it's because it is not enacted in legislation, and so there was a requirement to respect Parliament in terms of its decision making prior to reflecting it in the corporate planning process. And so it's just a kind of a sequencing of requirements reflecting that necessary decision.
The auditors have qualified their opinion because that plan's not available. So I'll just leave it at that. I just have a couple more questions. The extra $10 billion, is it anticipated that that money's going to flow right away? Like, quite often, the request for the $10 billion might be in the budget, but it might not be drawn down until, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years down the road. So my question is, one, when do you expect a drawdown, seeing you've only committed $18 billion so far? So when do you expect it to be drawn down? And then is that money, once this gets approved, would it be considered statutory, the $10 billion? And my third question is, would it be considered budgetary or non-budgetary?
Thank you for the question. Once the decision is made to enact the legislation, the CIB statutory capital limit will be $45 billion from the current $35 billion.
When does the cash flow?
In terms of your question of when the cash flows, it is based on quarterly schedules that the CIB submits to the Department of Finance, and that is based on an aggregated amount of all of their investments that require advances during that quarterly period. So another way of saying that would be the CIB asks for funds when it needs to disperse them and makes a request for the Department of Finance to provide that from the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
So it's statutory. And is it also non-budgetary?
In terms of the CIB, because it is statutory, the CIB does not need to seek approval on an ongoing basis to have access to it.
Does it affect government's deficit, or is it going to be set up as a loan from the CIBC or an investment? Or?
These are all, as the CIB makes investments and not, these are not grants, these are all repayable. And so the specific question around how the Department of Finance reflects it in the Consolidated Revenue Fund and the public accounts, I think we'd have to defer that question to Department of Finance officials.
Can I ask
Last
one more
question? Yeah, last question.
So the government also tables its borrowing strategy for the year. So is that $10 billion that they're looking for, is that included in the government's borrowing strategy? Would you know that?
I would have to defer that question to Department of Finance officials.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Senator Martin, do you have any question?
Yes, I think it's kind of related to what I've been hearing. So $10 billion is a lot of money. It's quite an increase from $35 billion. So I'm curious what assurances you can give that it will unlock more private investment. Can you talk about that process? And secondly, what concrete targets or reporting, so you talked about corporate plan, but specific like targets and reporting will the government use so that Parliament, that we can see whether the larger envelope is actually translating into more projects on the ground and better outcomes for communities? So what will we receive after the fact?
Thank you for the question. In terms of your first question around the level of private sector investment, I would say we have seen the amount of capital attracted to each project grow over time, but where it is not a one-for-one relationship to every project. And so it really represents the type of project that is there and the requirements in terms of the investors. And right now, the CIB has roughly $1.4 attracted in private sector investment. I think that one of the things that we have seen as well over time is that as investments grow and more projects proceed, more private capital comes in because of the opportunity that is presenting itself. In terms of your second question around accountability metrics associated with that, in the CIB's regular reporting, both from a corporate planning perspective as well as an annual report, it regularly reports across all of the key public impact metrics that it has used in making the investments that it has made. And so whether that is associated with the number of the GHG reductions associated with each dollar deployed, the ridership increases in terms of public transit investments, the number of people connected to broadbands in terms of the kind of the final mile of connection, the GDP growth associated with trade and transportation investments. Those are all accounted for in both of those documents, and the CIB tracks its performance against its plans as well in terms of setting targets, and is clear kind of when those targets have been met and when they've fallen short of the targets.
Yeah, I was just curious how successful You have been unlocking private investment. Investment seems to be leaving Canada, and that's been a concern. We've heard reports of that, but like your approach to really attracting investment, like how has that been? Like how has it been of late?
I mean, thank you for the question. The CIB this year, from April 1st to September 30th, reflected $2.2 billion in investments, where using the CIB's metric that it calculates of roughly $1.4 of private sector investment attracted to every dollar that it invests, indicates that private sector investment continues to be strong in Canada, and where the number of investments that the CIB made during that period was the highest number of investments it has made for a 6-month period since its creation. Using that evidence, I would say that it sees a strong and robust pipeline for private sector investment.
Thank you.
So, colleagues, we have a lot of officials waiting for other division, but at the same time, 10 billion is quite materials. If any of you want to ask a second question, I give you 30 seconds and maybe maximum 1 minute as an answer. So, Mr. colleague Friendler, Senator Friendler.
Two brief questions. The extra 10 billion, is it actually advanced or is it just a line that's available? Second question, you talked about the 18 billion that currently exists, and I'm not quite sure how you described it, but I think in one statement you said this 18 billion is already subject to negotiated deals, and I just want to clarify: is this actually in negotiation, or is it something that you just perceive to be on the horizon?
In 1 minute, it's possible.
Yeah, it's absolutely. Thank you for the question. The 18 billion represents legally binding agreements that are in place. There is, beyond that, in terms of your question, how much is remaining in terms of a pipeline. That's not subject to public information, mostly because it has to do with commercially sensitive negotiations with proponents, and where a number of these projects are quite large in this space.
I'm not asking about specific deals. I'm talking about an aggregated number. I don't think that's giving away anything sensitive.
So maybe you could provide a written answer to the question, the Senator Friendler. Senator Lefredor, please.
Monsieur le Président, what is the performance of the 18 billion invested so far, that's out there so far? Credit losses, performance, and projections on the upcoming funds?
Thank you for the question. The CIB's annual report speaks to the credit losses to date, where these have been minimal. The CIB's mandate allows for some degree of losses associated with attracting in private capital over time, where there is an acknowledgement that loss is present. But what we have seen is that those losses to date have been minimal. And are expected to be minimal going forward, based on the types of risks that the CIB is being asked to take in attracting private capital.
Thank you. Senator Strain,
Can we have shortly the regional breakdown of the investments to date? And can we also have what is the operation cost on a yearly basis for the bank? Thank you.
On my right, colleagues, any question? No? So I think that Madame Corley and Madame Brady, you got the winning ticket because you've been the first to testify, and I don't see your name for the other division. So you will be free to leave if you want. So we want to thank you for your testimony.